as was delivered by the previous Master of Ceremony. And for this session, I will be the Master of Ceremony. My name is Shirley. And I hope you guys had a nice lunch break, and then we're going to start another discussion that is hoped to be more interesting, and we'll build upon the foundation that was presented in the morning session before. So, without further ado, I will introduce you our moderator first, Mr. Ahmad Yaqub. Will be our moderator for the afternoon session. And for our speakers, we will have Dr. Insinyur Jamester A. Simarmata. He is a lecturer from University of Indonesia, the Faculty of Economics. If you may take your seat, sir. The next speaker we will have Ms. Rulin Nodnerus, a Senior Trade and Investment Policy Advisor at SOMO. It's a civil society organization that is focusing on trade, multinational trade and transnational investments. So you may take your seat. And the next one we have Mr. Sidi Rana Manggala, who is currently a PhD candidate of Ghent University in Belgium, focusing on the civil society, corporate social responsibility in the research and in his publications. So, Mr. Sidi, you may take your seat. And last but not least, we have Mr. Hengki Kurniawan. He is a very experienced researcher focusing on Indonesia, European Union, CEPA negotiation. So, to start the discussion, Mr. Ahmad Yaqub, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much. Related to the Indonesian EU CPA negotiations, in the previous session, we heard that Ambassador Yuri Tamrin emphasized that any good inputs, thinkings, recommendations from civil society organizations, including PPI Belanda, are welcome. So the government opens their door for us to give our view about how the discussion or the negotiations in CEPA that will be happening in the next October for the 6th round. So the government opens their door for our input. So I think it is a very good gesture from our government and should be followed up by us, students here in Belanda. And also from the previous session, we learned that the Indonesian government is currently facing, amongst others, challenge in balancing the interest between investment and trade business with the public, environmental, and sustainable development issues. So that's why we will dedicate this session to discuss more deeply about how to keep balance about trades and the sustainable development issues. And here we tried a little bit to discuss about this issue, and we have already 4 speakers that has been introduced by the Master of Ceremony. And for the first presentation, I will ask Ms. Rolin to present her presentation about the existing development of Indonesian EU CEPA discussions. And she holds an MA in European Studies from the University of Amsterdam. And she has been working on trade and investment agreement since 2002. Inter alia as the coordinator of Dutch GATS platform and the Dutch Free Trade Coalition. Can you explain a bit what is the GATS GATS platform is?
That was the GATS negotiations were the services liberalisation negotiations in the WTO. So that's how I started my trade work, and then I moved on to work for the Dutch Coalition, which various organisations working on trade and pooling their resources. And now I work for the Transnational Institute and for the Centre for Research on Multinational Corporations, which is known as SOMA, but that's a Dutch acronym.
Okay, so without further ado, let's hear Ms. Rolin presentations about the existing development of Indonesia and EU. Yes, place is yours. Maybe to keep our discussion on time, every discussion or every presenter should have a maximum 20 minutes of presentation. Then we will have enough time to discussion Q&A.
Try to keep it within that time frame.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so yeah, it's really good to have the opportunity to come and present here our critical perspective on the trade negotiations between the EU and Indonesia. I think it's also an excellent opportunity that the ambassador gave for you to have an input towards these negotiations. It's a really good thing, I think. So I'm happy to help develop your critical perspective on the negotiations, which I've been following almost from the start, together with our partner in Indonesia, the Indonesian Institute for Global Justice, or IGJ, and we've done a number of reports together with them on the CEPA negotiations. So we take a really critical perspective of these negotiations, because well, in general, we take a critical perspective of modern trade investment agreements as negotiated by the EU, and the CEPA follows that general model. So we are very critical of a lot of elements in those agreements, because we think that they are based on a premise that any increase in trade investment flows is beneficial. It helps to boost economic growth, it contributes to employment, and therefore it improves public welfare, both for the EU and for its trading partners. That is the logic that the European Commission uses. And so we do agree with the European Commission that trade can actually be an opportunity for economic growth. But we also agree with, because this is what the European Commission says about trade, so we also agree that trade needs to be properly managed to be beneficial. But we very much differ in opinion as to what managed trade should entail. So we really don't think that the architecture of trade agreements as the EU is currently pursuing them is actually helping to further sustainable trade. So can I have the second slide, please? We work together, for example, with Friends of the Earth in the trade work that we do in the Netherlands. And they recently did an assessment of the EU-Indonesia CEPA, scoring it on 20 different points that relate to sustainability, and they found that it would, as the negotiations stand, the proposals, it would only score 4.5 out of 20 on a sustainability index, which is not a very good score. Why do we think that the CEPA will fail so badly in the sustainability index? It's basically, slide 3 please, because modern trade agreements do no longer just deal with trade in goods and the reduction of tariffs. What's very central to modern trade agreements is the desire to boost cross-border trade in services and to provide easy market access and post-establishment protections for foreign investors. And those are very key elements in the Indonesia-EU CEPA negotiations. In particular for the EU, because of course the EU has the biggest transnational corporations and they would benefit most from a trade liberalization agreement. That is where we see the big problems. They want to explore new markets in Indonesia. And so the EU is looking for the highest possible level of trade liberalization across all the sectors of the Indonesian economy. And they want to make, in the negotiations, these liberalizations almost irreversible. So the idea is that you lock in the existing levels of liberalization and that you commit yourself to only moving forward in the way of further liberalization. So you can't go back to re-regulating your economy. So if a liberalization goes wrong, if it doesn't meet the objectives that the government intended, under a trade agreement it becomes very difficult to re-regulate that sector and almost impossible to take it back into public hands. At the same time, there is a real risk of negative impact, because if you open up a sector prematurely, then there is of course the risk when big transnational corporations come in that they will crowd out small domestic producers of goods and services in the domestic economy. So very simply, your small food sellers will not be able to withstand the competition of big European supermarket chains coming in. Also, if you have to liberalize across the board, it means that commercial service providers will be coming into what are sometimes very sensitive public services sectors, such as healthcare and education, and they will bring their commercial interests to those sectors. And experience learns that these big corporations coming in, they're usually more interested in making a profit than in actually providing universal and affordable services to everyone. So they will engage in cherry picking. They will tend to focus on wealthy consumers in big cities and not so much on poor consumers in outlying regions. So and then those services will be left to the government to provide, without the government being able to benefit from also catering to those wealthier consumers. And then this is made worse by the fact that in the negotiations, the EU will also be looking for what it calls a ban on performance requirements. And those are requirements for investors that come into a country to meet certain obligations. So, for example, it can be requirements to enter into a joint venture with a local company, to reinvest a percentage of the profits they make into the national economy, to share research and technology, or to employ a percentage of local workers, or to use local inputs. All those things the EU wants Indonesia to do away with. They want unlimited access for their multinational corporations. Even though those performance requirements are really a very important tool for a country like Indonesia to develop the domestic economy. So the EU wants Indonesia, it doesn't like that Indonesia still has a cap on foreign ownership, so a European company coming in cannot outright own an Indonesian company. There has to be, an Indonesian participation in ventures coming in. The EU doesn't like that, wants it away. The EU is not interested in sharing technology so much. It just wants higher protections for patents. It wants higher protections for intellectual property rights. It wants full and complete liberalization of capital, so that European transnational corporations can freely take capital in and out of the country. So that would make the country more vulnerable to external shocks. It also becomes impossible to ask foreign investors to reinvest part of their profits back into the country. And then, for example, if you liberalize your government procurement sector, that really would deprive local authorities of the means to help to boost the local economies. You can't give preference to local companies anymore. If you put out a government tender, it has to be equally open to transnational European corporations as to local companies, so you can't have a preferential system anymore. So all those things are really in tension with Indonesia's objectives to boost its own domestic development, which is a worrying thing. And so, like I said before, can I have the next slide? The slide 5 is what I want. So, the architecture aimed at across-the-board liberalization really disregards the fact that not all trade and investment is automatically beneficial, and that there are real risks associated with liberalizing trade and investment for people's well-being, for the environment. So our main point of critique is that if you really want equitable economic growth, and if you really want sustainable trade, then what you need is not a trade liberalization agreement. What you need is an agreement that really regulates trade and investment. A trade agreement needs to ensure that states are bound to uphold the highest standards to protect human rights, to protect the environment, to protect our climate. That is what a trade agreement, in our view, should do. And it should place direct obligations on transnational corporations to also observe human rights, the protection of the environment, protection of the climate. And it should also ensure that corporations that violate these values, when they engage in human rights violations or when they engage in environmental destruction, that they can be held to account. So instead of, that's sort of the opposite of what you see in trade agreements now. So
Is that six?
let's see if that's the right. No, it's the one before, so that's fine. Yeah, so what you see is now, you don't get a trade agreement that regulates trade. What you see is basically liberalization and very far-reaching protections for foreign investors. And they are so broadly phrased that they can really cover almost anything. So if a country decides to raise its minimum wage, for example, that can be interpreted as a breach of the right to a stable investment climate. This is a right that is enshrined in a normal EU trade agreement. Or if a state decides to tighten environmental laws, that could be construed as an indirect expropriation of an investment. And other protections are things like a foreign investor would be entitled to what's called fair and equitable treatment. Well, this is a very, very vague and very broadly interpretable protection. And the problem is that these protections can all be enforced through investor-to-state dispute settlements. So if a company feels that a government is taking out a is bringing in a regulation that could be construed as an indirect expropriation, or where a company can say, no, this is not fair, it's not equitable, they can actually sue the state before an international tribunal, and they can ask for sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation. Now, if you think that transnational corporations are sometimes economically even bigger than states, I mean, that's how big these companies have grown nowadays, they can also lodge very, very, very big claims if they feel that their interests have been harmed. And because those claims are so big, they can really exert significant pressure on the policy space of states. So, and this is what we see. The way in which the instrument of investor-to-state dispute settlement is being used is in this way, that they use the threat of claims to try and exert pressure. And Indonesia has already experienced that with a number of claims. Sorry? Yeah, so which actually caused Indonesia to decide to terminate all the bilateral investment agreements that it had. And that was a decision made in 2014, so Indonesia has begun to cancel all its bilateral investment agreements. But the EU, in the CEPA negotiations, wants to bring in an agreement that's very similar to the agreements that Indonesia decided to cancel because of all the risks involved, and then put it as an investment chapter in the CEPA agreement. So basically, Indonesia decided this kind of policy, this kind of agreement is too much of a threat to the freedom to regulate, but now through the CEPA there is a risk that it's going to be brought back in, and I understand from the negotiators that Indonesia wants a new model that leaves more room to decide its own political trajectory, to decide its own policy space, but the EU is continuing to push for, like, no, it has to be the broadest protections for foreign investors. So what we would like to see is a very much limited investment chapter, which makes sure that investors cannot bring these claims all the time, that they cannot have this political influence. And we would also like to see a much better focus on sustainable development. But what we see at the moment is, this slide has been up here for ages, that the EU does include a trade and sustainable development chapter in its trade agreements, but that they are all very vaguely worded. There are no real commitments, there is no monitoring, there is no enforcement. And this is a very sharp contrast to the privileges and protections that are being given to transnational corporations, with this means that they have to sue the state. And then all the things that are really important, like your international labor standards, human rights, environmental protections, climate change, everything, that is just like, okay, yeah, we'll say some words on this, but you can't really enforce this at all. So in our view, these agreements are really very much about the rights for foreign investment, the rights for transnational corporations, and there is some window dressing about all the other values in life, but it's not really going anywhere much. So what we think that needs to be done, and I think I'll round off there. So yeah, what we want is we want a review of trade investment agreements. We want to have environmental protection, the protection of human rights put first. So what we would like to see is a supremacy clause in a trade agreement to say that if there is ever a conflict between the whole body of international human rights law or international environmental law or international climate agreements, if there is a conflict between a trade agreement and that body of international law, then it should be very clear that the trade agreement takes second place. This is like the key thing that we advocate for. And that means that sustainable development chapters should have concrete and binding objectives to address trade-related violations of human rights, of labour standards, of environmental and climate standards. They should be monitored, they should be enforced. There should also be a complaints mechanism for any affected communities. So if a community, I don't know, villages are being displaced because a big corporation wants to develop a tourism project somewhere, then they should be able to complain, and their complaints should be heard. And then the state should have an obligation to hear those complaints. And the rights of foreign investors under investment chapter should be really severely limited. Any measures taken by governments aimed at improving human rights, improving labour standards, improving protection of the environment, countering climate change, should all really be fully exempt from any challenges by foreign investors. And foreign investors themselves should actually be held to the highest possible standards in all those areas. And the obligations that foreign investors should live up to should be legally binding, and they should be able to be held to account. And then there are some other red lines that we have as civil societies. That's the next slide. We think that vital public services like health, like education, like electricity, public transport should be excluded from liberalization commitments in the CEPA, because the state must remain free to regulate, to develop, to protect public services in order to ensure that they are universal and affordable for everybody. We think the CEPA should refrain from targeting measures that Indonesia is taking to promote domestic processing of raw materials, because those measures are aimed at increasing value added for the Indonesian economy as such. And it should not be left to transnational corporations to just take all the raw materials and transport them out of the country without adding much value for the domestic economy. And this, the fact that Indonesia is trying to do that has actually been subject of investment claims by investors. So they didn't like the new rules that Indonesia was setting for producing more value added in the economy, and they challenged this with investment claims. We also want that the intellectual property rights chapter does not include increased patent protection, because that comes at the expense of the availability of generic medicine, and as such that would constitute a direct violation to the human right to health. The same thing goes for seed patenting. So if you extend the patents on seeds, that helps the profits of multinational corporations, but then it becomes harder for local small farmers to actually have access to affordable seeds to grow their crops. Then, okay, I've already talked about the local content requirements, and we want Indonesia to be able to, and I mean the EU as well, if it wanted to use that, because there should be room to have local content requirements in a trade agreement. Also, preference for small and domestic, small and medium enterprises, and to promote local produce. And then I think our most controversial claim, also when I was talking to the ambassador, that surfaced again, is that we think that palm oil should be kept completely outside of the CEPA negotiations, because it's a very sensitive sector. There's a lot of problems involved with the trade in palm oil. There's environmental destruction, the slash and burn of virgin rainforests. There is a lot of environmental destruction. There is a threat to biodiversity. There is problems with people being driven off the land to make way for new palm oil plantations. There are labor rights violations. All these things are surrounding the trade in palm oil, and we think that these problems are so complicated, so complex, that they should not be part of a generic trade agreement, but they should be dealt with in separate discussions and separate dialogues and separate negotiations. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
So we will go on to the next presentation before we have the discussion with the audience. So the next presenter will be Mr. Hengki Kurniawan, PhD candidate. And he is based in economics in Vrije University Amsterdam. I hope I spell it right. Vrije, is it true? Vrije. Yeah, Vrije. Okay, Vrije University. Yeah. Because I'm from Groningen, so yeah. Please apologize my misspelling. And he has some long list of professional experience, but I will try to read some part of it. He was an economic researcher at the Department of Special Economics before in this university, or before in Vrije University. He was in Institute for Economic and Social Research, University of Indonesia. And he also lectured in many institutions in Indonesia, Prastia Mulia Business School, Universitas Multimedia Nusantara, and also Universitas Indonesia is among of them. And he also has a very long list of research projects and publications. But 5 most recent projects, publications, I can read here: the impact of universal healthcare coverage in South Sumatra, and he also involved in data collection survey of social service delivery and social security in some places in Indonesia under the grant from GIC.
Relationship between Indonesia and EU, especially on the 2 main topics, which is I will divide into 2 talks. First is about trade, and second one is about investment. So in order to do that, I need very long data. Like let's say, so here I show that I use data for more than 20 years. So before we go there, please let me review the very first impacts for countries to trade. So in basic theory, country trade because of one very obvious reason is that because of scarcity, China, Indonesia couldn't produce olive oil, so we have to import from EU country, for example. And also, EU has to import coffee from Indonesia. But not only that, if we go further, even though the countries can produce efficiently for any kind of products, the trade still happens because of what's called the comparative advantage, which is observed by David Ricardo 1 century ago. So basically, the idea is that even though countries are very efficient in producing any kind of products, trade still happens. And in the very recent empirical evidence and theory, we go to the what's called the gravity model. So here, so if the question is that country trade because of comparative advantages and scarcity, why there is so huge heterogeneity of trade and investment across country? Because there are many reasons. So, and in the last, I think last 3 decades, Tinbergen discovered one model. It's called gravity model. So, in this model, we assume that the countries as if the planets. So every country has the gravity attractions, and the mass of the countries depends on the economic size. Here you can see from, for example, the demand and also the market potential. And also, the variation heterogeneity of the country's trade size also depends on the distance, especially on the transport costs. And the next, we observe also the different price between products from different countries. And the last one, but not least, the important thing is that actually it's non-economic factors, which is, we can see here from the data after this, what called social economic factors. For example, trade agreements, whether we have trade agreements or not, whether we have government policy to prevent the trade, or also whether we have the colonial history. So if you look at the data, between Indonesia and the EU, if I can take very long data set from, let's say, before that, we go to the key figures of the trade between Indonesia and the EU. So we can see that in terms of the rank, last year, Indonesia ranked 24 in terms of export, so we are number 24, and number 33 in terms of import, and 29 in terms of total trade. And in terms of share, for import, we have only 0.5%, and export for almost 1%. And the growth is higher in export compared to import. And if we have look at the long-term data here from 2000 to 2017, we can see that the trade is increasing. We can also look at the export-import began to increase after the 2001. Because of why? Because after the Asian economic crisis, rupiah or Indonesian rupiah depreciates more than 100%. So relatively, the price of Indonesian product become very cheaper compared to the products from Europe. And then the European people, they started to feel that Indonesian goods are much cheaper than the goods from, let's say, from their own countries. So that's why you can see that the trade increasing after 2001. And when we look at the period around 2009, there's a drop. So why is that? It's the middle of the European debt crisis. So you can see the construction of export-import. If you look at the here, so you can see during this period, there was a drop both for import and export, and after that increasing again. And Indonesia is always has trade surplus from 2001 to 2017. So what we can observe here is that the trade data between export-import is always co-movement from time to time. It's like someone is following you from time to time. You can see that the correlation is very high here. So and if we break down the trade between Indonesia and EU, you can see that actually there are some 5 or 4 big players in the Indonesian trade between Indonesia and EU. The first one, of course, is Netherlands. So if we look at the size of the economy, the distance, we cannot just use economic reasons to explain this. Here you can see that actually the colonial history between Indonesia and the Netherlands is is the main driver for the trade between Indonesia and the EU, especially the Netherlands here. And the rest of the country, they are only small players. They are non-significant from the last 20 years until last year. So first one is the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Italy, and United Kingdom. They are big 5 players. If you look at the next figure here, if I could have one indicator to measure the disparities or inequality of the countries that trade with Indonesia. So I can show here that actually, here I use the coefficient of variation here. So from 2001 to 2017, it's quite high. So the ideal is that we have 100%, meaning that the disparity, the dispersions of the trade, of the export between the EU countries and Indonesia is just exactly the same across the country in EU. But here, if you look at the data, we got 160% from time to time, meaning that there are 60% distance of the variations between the trades towards the average of the trade between Indonesia and EU here. But if I can differentiate between the EU and the EU without UK, we can see actually if EU is excluding UK, the disparity or the equality across the EU is higher than the EU with the UK country here. And if you go to the next data on investment, still again, Netherlands, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Belgium, they are big players. And the rest of the EU countries, they are only non-significant countries in the terms of investment in Indonesia. So if you look at the data, last year, there was almost 3.2 billions of the FDI of the EU countries in Indonesia, and in total the stocks of the FDI is almost is more than 34 billions in last year. So if you look at the again, if you look at the breakdown of the countries between EU, again, Netherlands, UK plays an important role, and the rest of the EU countries they are not significant in the term of FDI between Indonesia and EU. And if I can again measure the disparity, the inequality of the countries that invest in Indonesia, and we see that from the 19th to 2018 here, so it's more than 20 years. If we compare between this inequality, so how to read this graph? If the graph is declining, meaning that the inequality across the EU countries are shrinking, they are smaller. But if the graph is increasing, for example like this, meaning that the disparity of the size of the investment amongst the EU countries become wider. So what we want is that we have the smaller or declining graph of the CV, right? And if you look at the yearly data, we can see that there was much volatile in the FDI investment in Indonesia, especially during the debt crisis in EU. And if you look at the data of the 2000s and 2002, we can see that if we separate the UK from the EU, and then we have very high inequality across the EU countries. But if we exclude the UK here, and we have lower, meaning that at that year, UK was the biggest and most intensive investor in Indonesia. And also if we observe the period during the 2008-2012, you can see there was a very high volatile here because of this guy coming up and create this harmony in the EU countries. And if you look at the data of the cumulative investment here, we can see that it's increasing again. So meaning that the gap between the FDI of EU countries in Indonesia is getting wider. But if we separate the EU again, you can see that if we exclude EU from the data, and then we see that the disparities become wider and the inequality become higher. And the next one, we'll see that, so what we can learn from FDIs of the EU countries in Indonesia. The first one, that there are only big players of the FDI in Indonesia, right? Only the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany. And they are unequal, meaning that maybe Netherlands invests 1 million, but the Croatia only invests 1,000 euros. So the gap is very high. And the next one is that UK actually was or is one of the most important investor in Indonesia. So if we rule out the UK, and then we have different conclusions. And if we look at other data of other countries, we can also see that other EU country contribution increasing, whether it's still small. And the next one, so what the challenge for Indonesia? So what I observed from the fifth round of the 5 rounds of this EU SEPA, we can see that actually there has been the imbalanced negotiations. When I asked the ambassador that most of the draft from EU SEPA is actually the proposal from the EU side. So I don't know whether it reflects the different readiness of the both sides, or it's just an Indonesian strategy to cope using the Tai Chi style, using others' power and then just use their power to make it happen. But I don't know which one is true. And the second one is that what I observed from the EU SEPA is that Indonesia is somehow it's difficult to catching up the level of the EU standard. The EU countries require very high standards on this, on that, but we are still trying to cope with the kind of standard. So this is 2 challenges that I mentioned especially for EU SEPA. And so what we can learn for the next one, what can we conclude here? What is take out from my talk today? Is EU-Indonesia is only dominated by big players, of course. And actually, if you look at the percentage of the investment and also trade between EU and Indonesia, there are still a lot of untapped potential threats in investments, meaning that we still have very huge potential to increase our trade investment. And the third one is that Brexit will deteriorate the harmony of the relationship between Indonesia and EU for the last 2 decades. And export is very high compared to import, meaning that if we want to increase export, don't forget the import, because they are related. If something happen with our import, maybe it will also affect our export. So we cannot look at the one things, but we have to look at the whole holistic thing. And the last one of my remarks that FDI is more unequal than trade. So because if you look at the inequality index, we have 60% disparities across the average in trade, but we have 300% disparities if we compare to average of the investment. So what is my recommendation for my talk today? So first one, actually we can use this opportunity, the negotiation between the SEPA negotiation between Indonesia and EU, to increase our position, especially in the relationship between EU and Indonesia in terms of trade and also investment. And the second one, we must extend more intensive relations. So not only with some big players, but also we have to look at the most non-significant players before. Next one, also we have to improve our environment. So here it's not only physical environment, I say. So we have to also consider, like the previous speaker said, about the human rights, non-economic factors, social-economic factors. And the last one is that my recommendation is that we don't have to only focus on export, that's one of the policy of our government, but we also don't forget to maintain import. Because of what? There's a word profile from Indonesia. We cannot only clap one hand, right? We have to clap 2 hands. So clap one hand doesn't happen. If only something doesn't happen, voice doesn't happen if we only clap 1 hand. So that's why we have to also focus also on import, maintain the import. Okay, that's it. Maybe that's of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Dr. Insinyur Jamester Simarmata, DA, and he has a PhD in economics from University of Lumia, Lyon. France. And he also has further education in mid-October 2003 until March 2004. He took sabbatical leave at University of Lumia, where he got his PhD. But now he is active as a lecturer in University of Indonesia in Department of Economics. And Dr. Jamaster also has a very long list of working experience. He was a commissioner of Agri-Chemical Palm Oil Plantation Company from 2001 until 2011, and consultant for several other international and national organizations in Indonesia. And he has also some list of activities in social organization. For example, a member of Indonesian Economists Association from 1992 up until now, and member and advisory group of ISKA, and vice chairman of MPM-ITB, or the Student Parliamentary Body. So, yeah, and after doctorate, he also published some books. We have 19 books here. 19 international conferences that have been attended by Dr. Jamaster. So, without further ado, the place is yours, Mr. Jamaster.
Thank you. My presentation here, it could be quite different because I would like to raise a new issue, especially in the CPO. CPO really has a double function or triple function. This is a private goods, but it is also a public goods, which means it will be giving the humankind a whole benefits. Like, for example, the use of CPO as a source of biofuels. It will be used to combat the global warming. So even though the CPO is usually used for private use, but it has a second impact. For example, this will be used as a biofuels, which will be reducing the global warming. So this is one of the difference between my presentation and it might be the other writing. The second issue is also, I take the lesson from the European Union, the so-called CAP, Common Agricultural Policy. In their treatment of the issue, they have raised the issue of public goods. Previously, the export from the European Union has been subsidized. It has been subsidized, and then because of that, it has been criticized by the WTO, and then the European Union has changed the problem to another issue, to the issue of public goods, so that it will not be seen that European Union has been also conducting always the subsidization, but with another form. So this is the kind of important difference between my presentation and the other presentation. So, okay. So what we see really, the world is deficient on vegetable oil. The world is vegetable on vegetable oil, and then the consumption of vegetable oil is increasing. So this is, we see, where do we get the inadequacy, the lack of this vegetable oil in the world. So what we see here, there has potential to meet the rise in demand could be only provided by the palm oil production. So, yeah. I show you this table. You see here, there is an increase in consumption, both food and non-food, from here to here, and then it needs additional total here. But you see here, palm oil, how much in 2015? It will produce 65 million tons of palm oil. What will be in 2050? No one knows yet. Soybean, it will be 53.7, and then it will be, how much will be added? No one knows now. But now the very important problem is sunflower. It will be a limit in the production of 215, so 16.8, and in 215 also it will be only 16.8. Additional production could be expected from this, and then other, more also additional production. So where do we get this requirement, this additional requirement for the world consumption? So this is, the data has been taken from the OECD, FAO 215. World population at the time is 2.3 billion persons. But in 2050, the population of the world will be 9.2 billion persons. So no guarantee for these usual sources of vegetable oil. It will not be increased to the 2050. So we are searching, where do we get the additional? Yeah. So here we see here, as a marketable good, CPO is private goods consumed by individual or private institution. It's consumed by every person. But from the other side, CPO will be a source of energy for renewable energy sources, replacing the fossil fuel, and environmental issue being the GIG, a public goods. A public goods means because it will be beneficial for the whole people. So even though it is a private goods, this CPO, it has a global benefit. So that's why in here, the production CPO must be planted in tropical forest, generating GHG and endangering the biodiversity. This is the negative side, but CPO's private goods characterized as well as public goods characterized. So it's a double. At least here we have the CPO, a double function. It's a private good, yes, but it also beneficial for the whole society in using as a source of energy, renewable sources, and then it will be fighting the global warming. It will be fighting the global warming that has been derived from the fossil fuels. So, CPO as food. We know the world should be sufficient in food. If there is no sufficient food, then there will be a crisis. So even though CPO is a very private goods, but in totality, it will be a global requirement. It will be called as a food security, should be maintained. Food security maintained, so there should be a guarantee that food should be sufficient. Nutritional sources should be sufficient. So in that case also, from nutritional point of view, CPO also function as a public goods. But it will be also as a requirement for all people. In a small sum, it will be only as a private goods. But in totality, if there is any sufficient CPO, insufficient food, nutritional from vegetable oil, it will be a global concern, it will be a public goods, so that's why CPO really, it is not as such as you have seen it, that it is only a private good in consumption, but it has a double function, multiple function. Private good as well as the public goods. Any deficiency of CPO should be repaired by thinking its public goods characteristic. So if we have any sufficient provision of CPO, it should be seen from the other side that it will be a public goods, and then in that case, there should be a global point of view to see a CPO. Not only see this private goods characteristic, but we should see how is the global impact of this deficiency of CPO or the other vegetable oil. How CPO could be a help? So here, I take here an example from the EU target production of 10% of all transport fuels from renewable sources of energy by 2020. So 2 years from now, it has been the target of EU to use 10% of the fuel from biological sources. So what is that here there? So they acknowledge it is ineffective to do that by the European Union because of what? Due to the indirect land use of change arising as a result of increased planting of first-generation crops, such as maize or oilseed rape, greenhouse gas emissions are unlikely to be reduced. It will not be reduced. So what will be seen there? There will be a new conversion of grassland and uncropped land into arable production, which will be negatively impacting the global warming. So this is the so you see here, if you follow the directive from the European Union in 2020 that you should have 10% of the fuel should be derived from plant seed, oil from this vegetable oil. They say, what? 10 minutes. Oh, so this is the EU Union could not be fulfilling their target. So when do we get that? So the only one we should have is to replace those other sources with CPO. So the CPO here is really a rescue. More. I would like to touch a small issue on EU trade. It has been really touched before. EU trade and Indonesia has a beneficial for the two sides. It's a complementary trade. It will be beneficial for the two sides. So you see here, for example, So you see here, for example, the EU trade from vegetable products. This is the very important thing from product with the EU. So it's very important for Indonesia, but it's also important for the EU because they are also taking benefit from the export from Indonesia. So you see here again, here is the data about how is the development of our trade with the EU in several agricultural products. Yeah, so I would like to take a comparison between how is the palm oil with soybean, sunflower, rapeseed. So you can see here, what is very important here, per average productivity of a ton per hectare per year for palm oil, 3.74. While for soybean is 0.38. For sunflower is 0.48. So this is the highest one. It means per ton oil of palm oil will be required less land for growing the palm oil. You know, for example, European has been scarce in land. So if you still force the production of vegetable oil from European Union, you will be making more stress in the utilization of land. So this is the case of here, and then it's again showing to the previous one that CPO is a rescue really in this production of vegetable oil. So what we can see here, the palm oil is the most beneficial sources of vegetable oil, which is very needed by the population of the world, both as a source of nutrition, also as sources of renewable resources, and it is also the least using land. So per ton of CPO is the least requiring land. So that's why it's very beneficial from many other aspects. So this, I think, it should be one of the point of view that we should be in cooperation all over the world, the population of the world. The population from Indonesia and also from the European Union. So what I would like really, I think there has been an error in my file. Yeah, because it's an explanation. So the explanation is, that is missing here is about that there is the substitution of previously the export from the European Union has been subsidized, but in the new form there has been changing it to the issue of public goods, and then it is not all again seen as a subsidy, but really the problem is the changing of the issue, and it has been the simulation of some other form of subsidy to the other. So it is like in the public interest, public goods. So okay, I have to stop here. I don't know how my file is so young. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mark. So I think the discussion will be very interesting because two of our speakers, present a quite different perspective about this issue, about the CPA and also CPO. But before we go to the next discussion with the audience, I will invite our last speaker, Mr. C.D. Randamanggala, and he's doing his PhD at Faculty of Bio Science Engineering, Khem University. I read his presentation a little bit. He will discuss about cinnamon, which is very interesting for those who love cook, right? Because Indonesia is one of the biggest exporter of cinnamon. So without further ado, please take your place, and I will read a little bit of your CV, because I have like 15 pages of CV, very long also. But I will take some part of it. He used to live in the Netherlands, right? So that's why he speaks Dutch quite very well. And he also appears in many media coverage, Metro TV, Kompas, SCTV, etc. And he has some certifications, AIMS, mind mapping for CSS department, and NGO Connection Day from ASEAN Foundation. And he also has some list of professional consultant career. In August 2016, he was head of research for UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, and switched Indonesia as managing partner between 2015 until February 2017. And he also used to CSR consultant for BKKBN. It's related to birth control, right? Yeah. Indonesian government. And for Kadin Indonesia, he used to an advisory and consultant desk for conflict resolution unit. And also for LIPI as CSR consultant. So without further ado, the place is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Should I speak in Bahasa or should I speak in English? Huh? Okay, I better speak in English. So, hi. Hi. I'm going to do this very relaxed because I'm the last speaker of the day and maybe I will wrap it up a little bit. So, currently I'm a student in Ghent University, and my professor is a killer professor. Really, he's a really killer professor. And I'm going to bring a topic. So this topic is already being previewed by him. It's okay. So I will show you the concept of what I'm showing you today. So my topic is about sustainable trade for commodities. So Indonesia is now currently very cool with the word for, so I'm using the word for also, for commodities. So, next one. So, this is who I am. Second year, PhD. I love to be a student, but I also miss Indonesia a lot. Because I used to work from many kind of types of organizations in Indonesia. From CSOs, from companies, and the last one is an UNEP, as for the United Nations for blah blah blah. And I was the head of research. It was the topic on sustainable consumption and production. So it's really related to what I'm doing now for my cinema. Okay, next. So, what is actually sustainable development? It's very popular, it's a wow thing. Yeah, but it's actually, we here standing now is to give something for our children and the children after our children. It's to preserve the earth. It's another word of it. So they can meet their own needs. That's one. The second one, SDG, the 7 points. And then below that is like 150 sub-points. Is actually to work together. We cannot do this alone. We need partners to do it. So if the EU here, for example, just I want this, I want that, I want that, and they see themselves, I already adopt the SDG, but do they actually understand what SDG is? It's to work together. While I was in the UNEP, I was above EU. So I can control them. Hey, you should see our protocols before you speak about SDGs. So it's to work together. And the end of SDG, point number 17, is global partnership. You cannot work alone without the help of the southern hemisphere. We in the south. So the concept now is north, south, south, north. This is very important to understand also. Next. So this is what we have done in Indonesia. The historical dates. 2014, formulation of goals and targets. August 2015, finalization of the SDG. September, the adoption of SDG international member. And the latest, 2017, is the presidential decree. So what we see here, the Nawacita, is actually to strengthen our position in the global movement of SDGs. By accepting it. So we're gonna become a member. So it actually becomes a benefit to work together and to become one. And then with this active participation, we can have a role in the global development. Next. So the second one, what is trade? I'm not a trade guy. I don't know much about trading. But this is actually what I found, one of the papers. The trade is actually the exchange of goods between countries in order to profit from comparative advantages in the production of goods. A very, very difficult structure to understand for me. I'm not an economist or so. But I will explain later about the concept of sustainable trade. So how to trade in a sustainable way. Next. So this is the trade policy. Well, this is actually the slide from my professor, I took it. So this is actually the reasons. I don't want to talk about the although most countries are convinced. I want just to talk about the reasons. Yeah? About the health and environmental reasons, the product standards. It is very important that the European members or this 26 countries are following the direction of the peoples in Brussels that we should follow our standards. It's very protocol. But is it actually that necessary to understand or to follow it? So, next. So, if some part, the EU, are very strict, then the answer is, we as Indonesian, how can we trade? If there's very, very much barriers, obstacles, constraints, and how can we trade? Because our history, Indonesian, we've been doing trading since thousands of years ago, right? We are explorers, we are navigators, we are pirates, or pirates in a good way. I mean, we own the sea, yeah, Indonesian. So next. So from this picture, you can see this very urge for sustainability practice in commodities. But you can see this is the very people that are using a tie and wear very fancy shoes, yeah? And then you can see the farmers there. It's very gap between those two, right? People that are making the policies are wearing a tie, and the people that are delivering the goods, the commodities, are wearing sandals. Can you follow me? Right? Next. So this is the EU trade policies already been a little bit explained. This is what they expect, right? Social justice, human rights, high labor standards, high environmental standards. And then also, the EU works to ensure trade policy helps promote sustainable development, blah, 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 blah. These are their needs. But can we, in the producers level, meet these standards? Do they understand it? I mean, if you talk with a farmer, hey, if you want to sell your commodity to EU, read this. And the farmer said, nah, I prefer money, direct instant money, than following this policy. Well, that's the case in Indonesia. Thousands of farmers have difficulties to promote their commodities in Europe because people wearing ties and sitting in a very comfortable room don't see the situation in Indonesia that we also have threats from the basic. Next. So this is also next one from the SDO. Fair transition to a low carbon, transition towards a social inclusiveness, transition to sustainable. It's always about transition. But do the farmers can transition itself? The logic thinking. Can they change? To teach a farmer, at least it takes 1 year. Let's say for coffee, you teach them how to plant organic. It takes 1 year. And the EU has a deadline to complete this. Next. So I'm talking now about the concept of sustainable trade. Next. So what is sustainable trade? It generates economic value. It reduces poverty, inequality. Its basic is on environmental resources base. And it focuses on good governance. Yeah? Next. So this is one of my designs. Yeah? I even don't know, I don't know what I'm thinking, but it was like, I need to draw something. That is one of my designs. So FTA, people, the previous guys, the ambassador was talking about FTA, blah, blah, blah. But I'm talking about the whole concept of it. So FDA, and then you have the DG Trade, you know, the DG is for the Trade Minister, Trade Department of the EU. And then you have the INA, INA is us. So the EU, yeah, they have the purchasing powers. They will bring business, they will bring investment, they will bring procurement, technology transfer. It also will support Indonesia in the jobs creation, states revenue, global market, blah, blah, blah. But, yeah, Indonesia has difficulties with the 5P. The prosperity, the peace, the people, planet, profit thing. Yeah, the basic sustainable development. And there's very, like the previous SDO, I really need for the human rights, environmental perspective, legal. So how can we do it? There's so many things going on, and the production or the harvest, it will not stop. It needs to continue to produce, and the farmer says, I have limited time, I have limited money to do all these things, I just need something to eat for tomorrow. Next. So this is my research. Cinnamon. So we can see how cinnamon works. Next. This is the cinnamon world belt. 85% of the cinnamon used worldwide is from Indonesia. And it has been traded thousands of years ago. Yeah? Thousands of years. And one of the commodities of cinnamon is cinnamon burmani. Yeah? So if you buy cinnamon all around Europe, it's from Indonesia. Very popular, isn't it? Next. Skip. So this is the import. I just found some data and just plug it in, right? But this just to show the facts that we are the world leader in cinnamon business. Next. So this is also very, I just laugh at it while I was sitting in the toilet and just, leave no one behind. Really? Did we leave somebody behind for the SDGs? Do we? Yes, we do. Them, the farmers, we leave them behind. Always and always and always. Next. Next. Some people already mentioned before, niche market. Challenges of cinnamon trade is the same as any commodities in the Europe. Access to niche market, by requirements, compliance standard has already been explained by Wahida and Mary. So these are the conditions. It's actually very difficult to penetrate. Next. And this is also very important to understand. The certification and threats. Yeah? Certification offers a set of expected benefits that can be broadly divided into economic and environmental benefit. Yes, of course. But you know how much this one label costs to have? It's 10,000 euros. Do you think a farmer can buy this organic label? No, sorry. Next. So this is this challenges in the cinnamon. If you compare the label that I show you, fair trade, yeah, doing good, yeah, organic. You see, this is my own picture that I took. Yeah. This is a few months ago. Next. So this is my findings. There are difficulties for everything. Price, market, even support by the local government. They need to be trained. They don't have any cooperative. Yeah, this threats. Next. So, how do we do it? They need to have access to the European market. They need to have this geographical indication. They need to understand about the community for specific persons. Next. This is the conditions. Clear cutting, just put it on the streets. Traditional debarking, low derivative of product development. Next. So, how do we do it? Certification scheme should include the important group of smallholders like I mentioned before, work together. Standards and certification lead to exclusion from standard-sensitive market because the demand of set of financial is always a problem. If you want to do something, you don't have money or financial support, you won't go anywhere. And smallholders, they have to work together as a group. Group certification, next. Do I have still time? Just 5 minutes? Okay. Please, let me explain this. Final. Okay. Theoretical improvement. Yeah? It's always about generating livelihood. Always. Yeah? You have to intersectoral upgrading. Yeah? The whole social capital terms. Yeah? The whole community terms. From farmers, the buyers, the retails, and the end consumers. It has to be totally upgraded to understand for the environmental practices and awareness of sustainability. Next. I made this slide like 2 years ago, and I still don't know what I made, but it's okay. So, this is the environmental standards improvement for the certification. I call it tailor-made. If you want to sell something here, and then this is my standard, European-minded, yeah? And you tell that to the farmers have different culture, different way of life, how can they accept European terms? Yeah? The farmers, they wake up, let's say, late in the day, and they do have their own tradition. And then you push European standards, very difficult. So I suggest it should be tailor-made from upstream, the implementation of Nawacita, and then the local government. Then upstream too, regulations should be better. And then the NGO, as their watchdog, as their implementator of the concept, should be assisting the farmers. And then the end, downstream, yeah, social intervention, like Yuri also mentioned, intervention, and then blah, blah, blah. And then downstream, the very basic, is the development of the human resources. And then if you do all this, yeah, you can transform not only a community, but you transform an individual. Yeah? Next. So, final. Yeah, I don't want to read this. I just want to have last words. It's not fair for us, Indonesia, because I'm not telling about myself, but I'm always fighting for people that are less have. Yeah? Because they need money to feed their kids. And if they don't need money, if they don't have money, they don't have a future. Yes, I'm always fighting for them since 2004, since I was working for the tsunami in Aceh. That's when I saw that everything that we as Indonesians are very lack of things. And it was one of my motivation to work in the social, especially in the sustainable patterns. So I hope this is it's more like a sharing to you, to guys who are maybe younger than I am, is to see Indonesia not only from Jakarta, but also from people that are living outside of Jakarta. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So before I give the opportunity for the audience to raise their hand and ask some questions to the presenters, I want to ask something to the audience. Is there anybody here came from the government side? Because I want to give the first opportunity to ask to someone from government? Nobody? Okay, so I think, oh, you from government. So. Okay. So the government, yeah, okay. Sure, yes. 3 questions before, because we still have approximately 15 minutes. 3 questions for you, and for you, and for you, Mas Edi. Yeah. Yes.
This session is very crucial and significant here. And sadly, it's not about the whole family happy story that we heard since in the morning, but I'll try to be okay. I'm glad that we heard some mixed reviews, but also balanced reviews and presentation from each of you. From Ibu Rolin on the line. I've got a question for you, but for the other speakers, my fellow Indonesians, I love the way you present the fact and your insight. This is truly what we need to hear today, despite all the glorious stories about Sipa. However, really, you're working for the civil society, if you like. I wonder how could you convince the government, particularly my government, with, of course you have long stories and presentations, it's very convincing about the human rights, all the red lines, if you like, of the CIPA, not just the good things of this comprehensive economic agreement, if you like. But I think if you want to present this fact without comparing and contrasting to the other countries within the ASEAN region, your story might not be sold by you. Because of course they have a political agenda. Our neighboring countries, Vietnam, or let's say Singapore, or let's say Cambodia, or other countries, which is still equal to Indonesia. I'm not comparing us with Singapore because they are already developed countries. And what they are selling basically not commodities, but service. And the service basically is lack of the, let's say, the point in CIPA. I've read all the documentation about CIPA, but only a few lines talking about financial services, which is very crucial. Why? Because Indonesia is still deficit in terms of import. We're talking about goods, about export, particularly when we're talking about an export, basically is natural resources. But nothing in mind so far, to my understanding, about financial services, which is really, really big.
You should be talking to my colleague Mary.
Exactly.
She
Well,
works
that's
for
why I would
financial
like to
sector.
ask you, if you like to sell your story, I've read some of your publication files while you were presenting. It was very convincing to me, but in order to convince them, because they have political agenda, if you know what I mean, if they don't do this, step out from this comfort zone, choosing CIPA for this agreement, they will be left behind by others, particularly Vietnam, as our new sister. When we talk about ASEAN 5, I published my book in ASEAN 5. I'm not economist. So that's the thing you have to think about. Of course, you present a very factual stories. However, perhaps, from scientific perspective, contrasting and balancing, what about the other neighboring countries in this region, benefit from CIPA? If you don't do this in Indonesia, don't worry, you're still fine. But if you do this is all the red lines that you have presented. For Pak Henki, I'll tell you a story about trade. This is factual. And you touched the point on Brexit. Basically, UK is still number 2 investor after Japan. So, rather than we focus on CIPA, parallelly, we should also focus on Brexit, which will be happening in 2019 March. And that's the thing about the financial services. Because what we've got so far, talking about BNI, for example, in London, our license is from FCE based in the UK. And why we want to have that license? Because in the past, having the license, you can operate UK and Schengen. But what about after Brexit happens? Nobody knows. And that's why mostly of the European banks and other investors, they already moved their assets across the Schengen. You name it, Amsterdam, and Frankfurt, of course, Paris. So I love your story about that, Bapak. So Bapak, for oil is also very crucial because Indonesia is the biggest exporter of CPO. But Bapak, why don't you put, let's say, talk about the vegetable oil. What about the olive oil? Because it's also important in EU. Yes, in terms of health and everything. Most of our customers, they prefer to choose olive oil or more healthier than palm oil.
Perhaps it is from Indonesian side, CPO is most important.
Right, okay. So now I understand, that's your reason. So Pak I love your story, I'm with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's collect all the questions first, and we'll be giving the answers after all the questions. The next question from Mas Hadi.
Thank you. My name is Hadi Purnama. I'm a PhD here at UPI. First, I have a comment, and the second is a question. My comment is that, from my perspective, that putting the trade and investment all together in the same part, I think this is the biggest mistake that ever made in the system of trade agreements, because both of the fields are in the different mechanism in terms of law. So, referring to the cases, there is a 40 cases under the NAFTA, which caused two dispute settlements. One is on the trade issues, and the other on the investment issues. Although it's triggered by one case. So one case can also be at two dispute settlements. So that's something that Indonesia, I think, need to be aware of. That being put the trade and investment all together, it's making things more complex in terms of handling all the issues. And then I think one of the most important things it's about. I just want to highlight about ISDS, about investor dispute settlement, because in the last development, especially on the EU, consider investor-state dispute settlements based on the decisions of European Court of Justice on the ACMEA case. It's considered against European law. And then the question is, how about the ISDS under the BIP between the EU or EU member state, which is outside of the EU member state, whether or not it's still considered to be against EU law. So that's, I think, something that needs to be. I asked this question also to someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here at in The Hague, and they cannot answer my question. So I don't know whether this forum also can answer that question. But I mean that's very very important, because it means that this is something that Indonesia also needs to be seen, because I was a part of the review team of bilateral investment treaty that finally recommend the terminations of Indonesia BIP with the Netherlands. So I was part of the team, and then I mean, seeing how the SEPA works and how the especially on the issues of investment, I think it's kind of like opening or trying to make things old to become a new again, which is something that Indonesia needs to have a different stand on the investment issues, especially in the investment field, because investment, especially when Roland presented, you're presenting, I think it's very interesting how this investment that Indonesia tried to avoid, it's happening again in the SEPA. So I think I know why, because the different regime.
Mas Adi,
Yeah.
can you
Yeah,
brief
I
into
think
the questions,
one.
please?
Yes, I already asked that. So, my question is, do you think, I don't know, do you think, as mentioned by the ambassador earlier this morning, do you think we need to conclude the SEPA? I mean, because of Jokowi mentioned that to conclude the SEPA in the end of this his first term, whether or not it should be concluded, or we need more time in order to get more comprehensive negotiations on each matters in the SEPA agreement, or at least the draft of the agreement. I think that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question, please. Please keep the question brief.
I'll try. Okay. Hi, I'm Lucia. I have some comments and some questions specifically for Mr. Sidrana. You gave a really interesting presentation, but I wanted to ask a question on the matter of the standards. I was wondering if it could actually be dangerous to equate the concept of human rights and labor laws as outside concepts when it comes to like those local farmers, even though the things that human rights laws and labor laws would entail would benefit these farmers, and these are things that they would want, but maybe don't have a concept of because that's just the way things have been. So then, in that case, would the problem not be with the infrastructure surrounding regulations rather than the regulations themselves? I totally love your point about asking the local context about what the regulations would mean for them, like what the standards would mean for them. But at the same time, looking negatively upon human rights approaches and labor laws and things like that, would that not be potentially dangerous, especially if it's paired with trade liberals?
Yeah, so speakers, I think more questions are addressed to you, Rodin. So would you give the answer first?
I think I want to answer the question on the regulation and standards first because I can be very brief, I think. I think if you want to uphold that kind of standards, I mean, which we should because they are universal standards, human rights cannot be traded away, they are universal standards, environmental protection should be a universal standard. But yeah, if you really want to uphold those values, that requires education, it requires assistance for the people on the ground to actually meet those standards. And in that sense as well, I think we do not need agreements that are aimed at liberalization and at competition and profit making, but we really do need agreements that are aimed at cooperation and at building a sustainable planet. So it just sort of underscores my point really, and we should dedicate resources towards actually lifting everyone on that tide of putting human rights, putting the environment and putting our climate first. So that just, I mean, I know that is like a sort of utopian answer, and it requires a lot of work on the ground, but that is what should be done. I think you should embrace the principle and then work from there to start on the ground with practical implementation. But it's all about embracing principles first. Let's see, so then, okay, your first question, I don't know your name, so I just have to point at you, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think we are furthering our critique all over ASEAN. So basically, we keep telling everyone that the problem is with global elites, actually, because these agreements are not in the interest of specific countries. They're in the interest of global elites. They're in the interest of transnational corporations that have their ties all over the world. Like, it's about these transnational corporations starting to control production chains in different countries. So that goes for Indonesia, it goes for its neighbors as well. And we work together with civil society organizations all over ASEAN. Towards the end of this month, we'll have the Asia and Europe People's Forum in sort of on the fringes of the ASEAN meeting, and we always discuss all these things there with all the counterparts from all the ASEAN countries, and we come up with recommendations towards ASEAN as a whole and the individual countries. So yeah, that's the way we work. That's all we can do, but I hope that people will listen to the logic of our arguments. Yeah. And then, okay, on the question whether the CEPA should take more time, I think, yeah, I mean, these are such crucial issues that you're going to set in stone, really, in this agreement, that you need to be very sure about what you're signing away. Yeah, about the legality of ISDS. This is a very big debate at the moment in Europe, which policymakers are trying to downplay. They're trying to say, no, ACMEA is just about intra-EU bids. It's nothing to do with wider FTAs with third countries. But we are expecting another verdict from the European Court of Justice, probably in the spring of next year. So I would at least wait with signing any kind of CEPA until we have that verdict in. Which is going to be precisely on that, about whether ISDS or ICS, as the EU now calls it, is compatible with the European system of law. And I would not be surprised if the European Court of Justice will say, no, we are the highest authority, so we are not going to have any tribunal second-guessing final EU legal decisions, and that would put ISDS in a severe crisis. And I would definitely wait for that, because the problem also is that Indonesia could terminate its bids, its bilateral investment treaties, because they have that window. They are valid for 10 years, then they have to be renewed, or they can be terminated, or they can be amended. Once you put a very similar agreement into the comprehensive trade agreement, there is no way you can terminate just one chapter in an agreement. So you want to be really, really, really careful before you put anything like that in there without the opportunity to ever amend it if the same bad impacts occur. So. And that is actually across the board with everything in that agreement. I mean, like you say, investment is very key to the EU. It's the trade in services that's much more important at the moment than trade in goods. For Indonesia, the trade in goods is important. That's what's being exported to the EU. But for the EU, it's the trade in services. They want their transnational corporations to come into two countries in ASEAN, use countries like Indonesia as a production platform, with no real benefits to any economy except the economy of the transnational corporation itself. And transnational corporations are now sometimes already bigger than states, and this is what these agreements are geared up to do, just to make the economies of transnational corporations themselves even bigger. And yeah, be very careful what you sign away.
Yeah, Mas Eki?
Maybe I have like questions from the Mas Hadi. So maybe in the sense of legal nature is different between investment and the trade. But for us, economy is actually the same. Maybe I could give a simple illustration for workers who work in a restaurant. So it's different maybe preparing pasta and nasi goreng in the kitchen, but for the waiters, they are the same, right? Whatever kind of food that they serve to the customer doesn't cost extra cost for them. But for the chef who work in the kitchen, they have to prepare different stuff. So in my view, trade and investment is very important. Here I want to emphasize the FDI, not the market, the financial investment. I would like to emphasize FDI, the foreign direct investments. So it's very highly correlated between those two. Because, for example, there have been many empirical evidence data showing that actually the increase in investment in one country, like for example Indonesia, is actually triggered by the trade. So some country, for example, that have trade relationship with Indonesia, they would like to build a, let's say, the branches or the marketing offices in Indonesia or the factory in order to minimize the cost. So if you look at those kind of relationships, it's very, how to call it, they affect each other. So investment, in this case FDI, could affect the trade provide, and also the trade could affect the FDI. So we cannot. So we are the waiters in the case. So you are maybe the chef. So if you prepare pasta, it's more simpler than maybe you have to prepare the rendang for the customer. For us, the waiters, they are the same. I think that's it.
What about the Brexit? Should we focus on the effect of Brexit?
Oh yeah. I would like to thank also. Yeah, I agree with Desi. Actually, thank you for your compliment. So it's very important. So I just realized that actually Brexit also has an impact on the EU and Indonesia relationship. So not only impact on the UK itself and also the EU countries, but also now I have you finding. Thank you for inviting me for this event. So now I have another, let's say, another stuff to work on in the future. Thank you.
Okay, there was also questions for you, but sorry, but if you want to add something.
I would like to raise again the issue of CPO, because it's very important for Indonesia. CPO is a substitute for our previous crude oil. Previously, we were the member of OPEC. Now we are not a member of OPEC anymore. So the product that could substitute for oil is the CPO. Now I think now we have been the #1 producer in volume of CPO all over the world. But there has been a handicap for that. So the handicap, for example, raising the efficiency in some quality of the CPO for half, for example, for that. If, for example, we are able to have that the lack of the vegetable oil in the EU is taken from oil, we could export our CPO. It will relieve our currency rupiah depreciation now in Indonesia, yes, that's for sure. If you can increase our CPO export, it will be also relieving us in this currency problem now. It's now due to mine. As far as the olive oil, in the statistic of world vegetable oil, it is not so significant. So it's not included there. So even though it is very important to the European countries, even for the other, but in terms of volume,
I understand the economic significance of palm oil for Indonesia, but I think that palm oil is really unsustainable if virgin forests have to be cut down and burnt to make way for what is a monoculture that has the effect of biodegradation that causes the extinction of irreplaceable wildlife and that comes at the expense of land that is available for other crops, for foodstuffs, for the food security of people in Indonesia, people being forced off their land. So this is why we say that you shouldn't have palm oil in the CEPA negotiations, because of all these added problems. And I think maybe that goes for a commodity like cinnamon as well. I mean, that they are so laced with all these environmental and social problems, and also because it's a raw material, little value added. I mean, it's not something that should be dealt with in the generic clauses of a trade agreement. It requires specific attention, and that sort of comes back to your question, like, should you sign a CEPA quickly or should you think about it more carefully? I think we really, really need to rethink our trade relations. I mean, not as the EU and Indonesia, but as the people of this planet as a whole.
Yeah, I think, as a moderator, I don't want to have this discussion about the CPO getting longer and longer. I think we have another session for that. But I will give one to say it? Not what said, what, no, final word, but yeah, final word for you, because you explained extensively about CPO, and I think you know something that will answer, maybe clarify something. But
Okay, I think in terms of all of the human rights violation, we acknowledge that there is some lacking in there. But the role of CPO for economic development is very important for Indonesia. It will be raising the poverty, taking the poverty out. So it's one of the sources of funds, the sources of foreign exchange for Indonesia now, replacing the previous oil.
yeah, I think there will be another discussion relating to this matter. I think PPI Belanda can have another session for this message. Before we close or we end our session, I will give one opportunity for Masih to give you.
Before I answer you, Mutia, I will answer them. Right. So I've been one of the advisory member for the conflict resolution unit for the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce. I quit. I resigned after 1 year. I was so stressed dealing with palm oil. I resigned, even though I have a very big salary. I resigned because it's giving me every day a headache. I have to deal with the business. I have to deal with the government. I have to deal with everybody. It's a never-ending story of stress in palm oil. Okay, I will answer you now. Well, my answer, Mutia, is no. For your answer, the whole answer, I will answer is no. But you need to translate the concept of human rights in their language, in their dialect, in their behavior, in their culture, in their way of life. It's very important. Like example, animal welfare, right? What the blah 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 is that, right? It's like the water buffaloes. You know water buffalo, kabo, yeah? You need to give them proper feed. They need enough sleep before they work. But if you see in the current condition in Indonesia, do the farmers, are they even evil to their water buffaloes? They aren't. They give the water buffaloes enough to eat. They give them enough to sleep. But they do it in their own way. Right? But what the Western people see, you're not doing it my way, damn it. So you have to do it my way now. But we are doing it already thousands of years ago, right? We've been doing very good practices in agriculture since thousands of years ago. Even if you are still wearing those kind of short pajamas and you're still eating Neanderthals, we're already doing good in Indonesia. That is why I'm always defending Indonesian rights. You just need to translate it to them in their own language. That's it.
Thank you. So, to the committee, do we still have some other time or some additional time, or should we end it now? Okay. So, this is the end of our program, and I cannot give any short conclusion about our discussion because there's a lot of things interesting. All the presenters, in some parts they blow my mind. I got some very new information, and I think it's very rich information. It's also perspective for PPI Belanda because they have aims to draft some commentaries and also recommendations for the government. I think from this discussion, there's a lot of stuff to write down. I think. So let's end this session. Thank you very much, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.